Welcome to the inaugural webinar, How to Survive Peer Review in Social Sciences and Humanities. My name is Michael Prila. I'm currently a Distinguished Professor of Media and Communication Studies at Halim University, which has one of the top-ranked media schools in South Korea. I've published in numerous social science citation index journals and have conducted reviews for more than 30 top journals in the humanities and social sciences, published by Elsevier, Springer, Wiley, Routledge, and Sage, among others. In addition, I'm also a member of the editorial board of one top journal in my area. So overall, I'm very familiar with what it needs to survive the peer review process, and I would like to give you some insights and advice in this webinar. So let's look at the agendas of today's webinar. I will cover the following areas. First, I will give an overview of the peer review process. Then I will speak about models of traditional and alternative peer review. I will speak about understanding and responding to reviewers' comments appropriately. And in the end, I will give tips to avoid and overcome journal rejection. So let's start with the overview of the peer review process. So what you see in this slide here is the academic publishing process. In academic publishing, the peer review process of an article is a long process from the time you submit your article until you get the final decision on your article. So basically it starts with the author submits the article, and then the editor receives the article and assesses the article and thinks about if the content is new and matches with the scope of the target journal. If the editor immediately thinks it does not fit, then the article might get rejected. If the editor thinks there is some interest in your paper and article, the editor is sending the article for review, but first he basically has to search for reviewers, and that's often quite challenging, as I know from my own experiences. Then the reviews are sent back to the editor. Normally the reviews take between 3 and 6 months. That's kind of the norm. I would say the good journals nowadays mostly only take around 3 months. And after that, the editor receives all the reviews, depending on the journal, 2 or 3 reviews, mostly the case. And the editor will make an assessment of these reviews and then makes a decision. In very exceptional cases, he might accept immediately the paper. I've honestly very rarely heard about that. If you're lucky, you might get at least a chance for a revision, which is a good starting point for basically having a chance that the paper later on will get accepted. So if you get a revision, you have to basically revise the manuscript and resubmit the manuscript again, and it basically runs through the same process again, as you can see here on the slide. It again goes to the editor, it's again sent to the reviewer, in most cases to the same reviewers in case they're still available, and then the reviewers will say if the revision was actually done well or not. In the ideal case, this revision gets then accepted, and this leads to the production of the article and finally to the publication. But there are certainly also cases where even the revisions are rejected. There are actually many cases like that. So even a revision is not does not necessarily lead to an acceptance. So what is actually peer review? Let's think about this in the following slide. Peer review is an evaluation of scientific, academic, or professional work by experts working in the same research field. It's used by journals, grant applications committees, ethics committees, and conference paper editorial boards. It is a quality control mechanism used by publishers to maintain the credibility of their journals. So the idea here is the experts in the field are checking your article and then decide actually if the quality is good enough to be published or not. It sits at the heart of scholarly publishing and has a significant impact on the rate at which science advances. This slide explains now how the peer review process plays a role in the advancement of research. So peer review is an effective form of research evaluation to help select the highest quality of articles for publication, as already indicated in the previous slide. Reviewers are independent of the journal editorial board as well as the research work under review. So that's a very important point. They are not connected. So the editorial board, sometimes reviews might also be from the editorial board, but in most cases they're also outside the editorial board. The filtering process and the feedback improve the quality of the published articles. What you see on this slide is the results of a survey by Elsevier Customers Insight Team, and they surveyed more than 2,000 researchers and asked them actually why peer review is important. And what you can see here is the gray lines is actually peer review should be able to do something, and then the participants also said what peer review is actually able to do in these orange and blue lines. And when you look at the different lines here, you can clearly see the basically most important point for researchers why doing peer review is improving the quality of the published paper. So again, we have this idea that experts are actually checking it and they give commands to improve the quality of the published paper. Then determining the originality of the manuscript is also an important point, 63%, for example, you see here. Determining the importance of the findings is also very high ranked. 59%, 58% is able to do that, I think, in 2009 as well as in 2015. And less successful peer review is seemingly in detecting fraud and also in detecting plagiarism. There have been actually several scandals in different academic areas that showed that peer review does not necessarily find fraud. So for example, manufactured data. Also plagiarism is certainly better found with specialized software nowadays. There are certainly also differences in the humanities and social sciences and the STEM peer review. I want to just highlight here some. Irrespective of the subject area, both follow universal criteria while evaluating manuscripts submitted. These are: how novel is the research? So is it original research? Is it a new idea basically? How persuasive is the argument? How does this work contribute to the field? So that's basically true, these questions for humanities, social science, as well as for the STEM field. However, a big difference is actually that in the humanities and social sciences, books still play a very important role, which is less the case in other areas. And in case of journal articles in the humanities and social sciences, actually the articles are much longer in comparison to the STEM articles, which means the peer reviewers actually have much more work to do since they have to read much longer articles. So let's speak now a little bit about the models of traditional and also alternative peer review. So what we see here is basically the traditional peer review models mostly. We have here the closed peer review, so-called closed peer review. There are three types of closed peer review. One is the single blind review. That means the reviewer's identity is kept anonymous while the identity of the author is known. The double blind review, that means identities of both the reviewers and the authors are kept anonymous. And then we have the triple blind review, where authors, reviewers, as well as editors are blind to each other's identities. So even the editor does not know actually who the reviewers and the authors are. And a more newer model is the open peer review. In that case, the identity of the authors and the reviewers are known by all participants, so they actually know from each other. If we look at the percentages, I would say in the area of social science and humanities, double blind review is clearly dominating. That means the reviewers don't know the identity of the authors and the other way around. While in other areas like the life and health sciences, actually single blind review is quite dominant. A triple blind review is still rare, but has been suggested to make the entire review process transparent and possibly remove the unethical biases that are still hidden within the editorial process, as I will show in some of the following slides. So what authors actually assume is when they submit a research article to a journal, they think that it will be probably reviewed and considered on merit. However, there are many cases where editors and reviewers have rejected papers based on bias, which is hence a major flaw in the peer review process. The roots of this problem are suggested to lie in the editorial process. And thus, various formats of review process like triple blind review and open review are continuously suggested and adapted by authors. So what kind of bias is actually existing in this reviewing process? Some are author related, for example, the author's reputation. So if this is a very famous author and the editor knows the person, maybe they might have actually a lower level for entry in the journal because the editor might think it's a good idea to have this famous author in his journal. Another example is institute affiliation. So if this is a famous institute, it might be also easier to enter the journal than a not so famous institute. Gender, several studies have shown that unfortunately still nowadays it's easier for men to get published than for women. A geographical background, there are certainly also some biases within some editors at least towards some geographical areas. And there are also some biases which are related to the manuscript itself. For example, there's a tendency towards positive or significant results. Poor English language certainly also doesn't help. This often leads in general to a kind of to discredit even the research if the English itself is not good. And competitive work might also be an issue. Competitive work means you're a reviewer and you think somebody did a similar research like you, but maybe found something that doesn't fit to your own research, and that's why you kind of tend to reject that kind of research. And in the end, it will not get published. So here also in this slide, you see also other flaws of traditional peer review process. The speed of publication is certainly important when it comes to some fast-moving fields of research, and peer review is one of the main reasons for the long manuscript processing times. As I said, the first round takes 3 to 6 months. The second round might take after the revision, it might take another 3 months. So it's really adding up. It mostly takes, if it's very fast journal, it takes at least 1 year. If it's a slow journal, it takes much longer than that to finally get published, at least online. Average manuscript processing times over the 5 decades actually have not changed that much. It takes around said to be around 100 days at least to have the first result. But again, this is still far away to get finally really accepted and the paper gets published. The next point is, with easy access to published content through digital libraries, it is almost impossible to hide the author's identity. So very often you Google, for example, and you Google some keywords and you might find actually also because this author did also many similar works before. Referees are generally researchers also who work full-time at universities or research institutions. They have therefore put in additional hours to review papers for which they receive no credit or compensation. So the referees are overworked, also don't get any compensation. There have also been several studies which have shown that peer reviewers may not be efficient at detecting mistakes or misconduct, as I mentioned already in the previous slides. And generally, 2 reviewers might not be enough to get a good evaluation for the editor to know if this is a good or not so good paper. So some journals go to 3 reviewers or even more reviewers, but in specialized disciplines, it's actually very difficult to find so many qualified reviewers. And last but not least, rejecting a manuscript is certainly easier than improving it. So that's another kind of flaw of the peer review process. It's kind of easy to reject a paper, but it takes a lot of energy by the reviewers to give a lot of excellent suggestions and comments to actually improve the work. In this case study here, you see by Peters and Cecchi, what happened is they resubmitted certain altered articles to psychology journals that had already published them, and these authors were from prestigious institutions, all papers published within the last few months. And after obtaining permission from the authors, they made some changes and resubmitted them to the journals. And the changes they made is they made small changes to title, abstract, introduction. Author names were changed, and name of institutions was also changed. The result was 3 articles were recognized as resubmissions. 1 article was accepted, 8 of them were rejected, all because of poor study design, inadequate statistical analysis, or poor quality. But we have to remember that this article was actually already previously accepted. None were interestingly rejected on grounds of lack of originality. So this is kind of an interesting point. This paper basically clearly showed the flaws of the peer review process. Even originally it was written to highlight institutional prestige bias also, because again, they basically, these authors were originally from prestigious universities, the one that were accepted, but then basically they changed the institutions, and that's why they kind of could show that that there are some biases. So then let's look, since we see the traditional peer review model had some problems, let's look at some alternative models basically that were used throughout the last years. The first one is the 3-stage review process initiated by a journal called Kairos. Then the multi-stage review process, also followed by several journals, for example, Open Library of the Humanities, based on a model prescribed by PLOS, and open review, mostly post-publication, adopted by several humanities and social science journals. I will explain now each of these models in the next slides. So what we see here first is the 3-stage review process. So in stage 1, when the editors receive the submissions, they evaluate it, deciding if it is indeed appropriate for the journal and if it's sufficient quality and scholarly merit to enter the formal editorial review process. If it is, then the the submission goes to stage 2, where the entire editorial board discusses the submission for 2 to 3 weeks, coming to collaborative assessment of its quality and potential to be published. The editors use this discussion to compile a review letter along with an overview pointing out specific areas of critique to focus on and send this information to the authors. If a text is accepted or accepted with revisions, the web text proceeds upon successful completion of revisions to publication. If the text is not accepted, authors who are asked to revise and resubmit are given the opportunity to continue with basically the stage 3 review and mentorship. So in the stage 3, actually, the editors assign a staff member to work with authors to guide, facilitate revisions based on the editorial board comments and evaluation. This mentoring can last up to 3 months. And again, after that, it basically goes back to stage 2, and if it's successful, then it finally will be published. So you see here, in contrast to the traditional peer review model, here actually the editorial board plays a much bigger role. Then you have the next one is the multi-stage review process. What you see here is kind of a mix of the traditional process with a more open approach. The author actually submits the manuscript to the editor, and the editor checks it if it's of interest. If it's of interest, he nearly immediately published the paper as a discussion paper, and at the same time he assigns several referees, and these referees, they can decide if they want to be open, so known their name or not, and they will do a review in the same way as in the traditional review process. But at the same time, this discussion paper also receives comments by the academic community. So there's a very open process here. Based on these comments, the the authors can basically answer these comments, and you will also see this in the final publications. And then the author is revising the publication based on the comments, and if the reviewers are accepting it, then it's basically the same as in the traditional review process, that it might get accepted, and finally it leads to a publication of the finally revised paper. So the big difference here is basically it's open. Also the academic community can make suggestions, and additionally these discussion papers are basically published very fast as a first draft, and only in the end there will be a final revised paper, which also sometimes includes also the comments of these reviewers. So then let's look at the open peer review process. The open peer review process, generally there is open identity. That means this form discloses the names of authors and reviewers who commented on a paper. Open disclosure, in this the full reviewer comments are made available alongside the published article. Advantages are certainly transparency. Everybody knows what's going on. Gives credit to reviewers, educates early stage researchers. Disadvantages are there might be less critical reviews because basically the reviewers know their name will be written, so they're more careful actually what they're writing and might not be so critical, especially maybe if they know actually the authors who submitted the manuscript. Open There's also been recently a number of online tools, including the much hyped Open Review available on ResearchGate, that allows readers to publish more formal reviews. So this is actually really afterwards there are kind of some reviews published here. There are several initiatives to encourage readers to comment on published content and even publish formal post-publication reviews. This process originally began with people writing independent blogs about published articles, and nowadays it's kind of commenting papers on different platforms. So let's look at understanding and responding to reviewers' comments appropriately, how we should do this best. There are basically different types of decisions. There is you might receive an accept. The paper is accepted without any changes. This is very rare. Honestly, I don't know anybody to whom this ever happened, but it sometimes happens. What might happen to you more often is minor revisions. That means the paper needs revisions like clarification of expression, additional references and correction, and typographical or grammatical errors. A major revision, I would say that's probably the most common one. The paper is valuable but has issues which need to be addressed through revisions and rewriting. And then there's a reject with invitation to resubmit, so-called soft rejection. The paper has the potential to be published but needs further work in the area. So that means basically the paper is really rejected by the editor, but he gives you a chance to submit the article new. And so this is kind of interesting case. And I think this is also increasing actually nowadays. And then certainly there's the reject itself, hard rejection. The paper does not fit into the scope of journal or does not make any contribution to the field in the editor's opinion. And unfortunately, I have to say that's what is most of the time happening. Many journals have acceptance rates of 10% or even less. So this is what you can expect the most times. And you're really lucky if you are invited for a revision actually. That's unfortunately the reality nowadays. So then let's look at the reasons for acceptance. There are several reasons. Generally, one of the most important reasons is the article provides insight into an important issue or demonstrates originality. Originality is one of the most important points. I cannot emphasize this enough. So there must be something new about your research and your article. In addition, the article should be certainly well written and easy to understand with minimal English language and grammar errors. It is also useful for decision makers, particularly in some areas this might play a role. It provides a base to develop a framework of theory. It stimulates new and important questions. The methods used to explore the research questions are appropriate. Connections to prior work in the field or from other fields are made. Reasons for rejection, on the other hand, are first of all, basically everything what I said previously you did not do. For example, lack of originality. So if you do something that already much research before did the same thing, it's very likely that you get rejected. You have to really find some new, you have to find some gap in the literature. Lack of theoretical integration of framework. This is something that is also very often in the social science, particularly, that you might even include a theory and have a theory part, but somehow it's not enough connected with your methods, with your results. It's kind of more a second thought, basically. So this is also often a reason why um, article gets rejected. There are certainly also other reasons, maybe less important one, but they might also add up and lead to a rejection. Poor English grammar, style, and syntax, certainly also not helpful. It can really be distracting actually for reviewers if they read articles with a poor English, and this might, in unclear cases for decisions, finally they might reject it, even so it could have been also maybe a major revision. Failure to conform to the targeted journal. This is not only about style, but this is one of the main reasons actually for the so-called desk rejection. That means the editor even doesn't send it to review out because he thinks that this manuscript does not fit to his journal. Insufficient problem statement, methods not described in detail, overinterpretation of results, inappropriate or incomplete statistics, unsatisfactory or confusing presentation of data in tables or figures, conclusions not supported by data. So these are just some examples. I would say these are mostly reasons for major revisions, not necessarily for rejection, but if there are too many aspects, you might also get rejected in the first place. Or if this is a really top journal, you might get rejected for even minor issues because they get so many high quality publications. Then conclusions not supported by data, and the author might be unwilling to revise the manuscript. This might also be a big issue, or incomplete, inaccurate, or outdated review of the literature. So be really up to date with your literature. This shows that you're an expert in your area. If you only use like outdated literature, it shows that you did not do your work, basically. So how to actually respond to reviewers' comments? First of all, carefully read and reread the comments they wrote. Decide whether you can address the reviewer's comments for resubmission, request for an extension if it's not possible, but normally they give you like 2-3 months, which should be enough time, I think. Group reviewer comments together based on the part of your manuscript they refer to. Make a list of changes, what is needed, and also outline your response letter and respond to all reviewers and comments. So what I do myself is actually I take each comment and basically take the original Word manuscript, and in the area where it fits, I make a comment there, a comment box in Microsoft Word, and really copy paste the comment there. And then I work through the whole manuscript. I mostly start with the easier comments for revision, and I work it through. And when I finished one of the comments and I did the revision on this part, at the same time, I write the response in the response letter to that specific comment. So this is a way how to go through the whole manuscript for the revision. Then certainly other things you should do when responding to reviewer comments: adhere to the journal's resubmission deadline. It's one thing you should also not forget: it's actually okay to disagree as long as you provide evidence. You don't always have to agree with the reviewers, but I would say also don't disagree too often. You really have to bring some strong reasons why you disagree with reviewer. Ensure you have made all the suggested changes. Spell it out, copy paste all the comments onto a different sheet. Be comprehensive. Respond to each comment with clarity. Use a clearly distinguishable way to outline changes made. And above all, be polite. You don't forget you're in a communication with these reviewers. You should be very polite, especially actually if you disagree with some of their comments. So some ways how to actually write these responses while agreeing. You can write like, thank you for your comment, we agree with your suggestion to something because of whatever and whatever reason. We have made changes to something on page so and so, line so and so, as you suggested. So in that case you actually agree with the reviewers. In case you disagree, you can still respond. You also write, thank you for your comments, we understand your concern about whatever issue, and however, because of whatever reason, you can explain then what's your reason. You basically don't follow it, but then you nevertheless don't just reject them. You have to show that at least you changed something. So you write something like, to make this clearer, we have changed something on page, line, and so on, or you added it to the limitation part. So you have to make at least some kind of compromise. I think it's not a good idea to totally basically disagree and just reject a comment of the reviewers. So last but not least, let me speak a little bit about some tips to avoid and overcome journal rejection. So what do reviewers actually look for? Some of the parts I already mentioned previously, and now again I will here give a short overview. Methodological and technical soundness of the paper are certainly very important. Major claims of the paper are important. Novelty or originality of the claims, as I previously mentioned, that's probably one of the most important points. How convincing are the claims? Evidence for the claims. So do the results actually support these claims? Potential interest of the paper to other researchers in the same field. Is the paper capable of influencing thinking in the field? Supporting documents or data that support the arguments of the claim, appropriate discussion of claims in context to previous literature, compliance with the journal's policy, data availability statement, and does the study seem promising to encourage a revision or resubmission? So again, this is kind of what the editor is assessing actually when he receives all the reviews. Avoiding rejection, there are several kind of suggestions I have here. The first one is choose your journal carefully. That's very important, and especially that you don't get immediately desk rejected, so that the editor is not immediately rejecting you even without sending it to reviews. Ensure that your manuscript is conforming to the aims and scope of the journal you are submitting it to. So read, every journal has written some aims on their websites, read it very carefully, read articles they previously published so that you get a better idea actually how this looks like. Then follow journal guidelines, go through the journal guidelines carefully and adhere to them to avoid rejection. Maintain high quality of work. Ensure that your work is impactful, novel, and serves the purpose of filling existing gaps in literature. Your work should add value to your field of research. And also choose your references carefully. Your references should be sourced from authentic and impactful regulatory journals. References should also be up to date. Too many old references do not make a good impression. So again, new references show that you're really up to date with the literature. Also avoid unethical practices. Avoid research on publishing misconduct. Put your manuscript through a plagiarism check software to ensure that your manuscript does not consist of plagiarized content. This might happen sometimes, you might not remember anymore that you took some parts from somewhere, so it's still good to kind of check yourself actually that there's not any plagiarism in the manuscript. Develop a strong argument, communicate your ideas well and support them with relevant literature. Develop your idea from your data to conclusions. Do not make any false assumption. Validate your results with statistical analysis, at least in the more quantitative areas, also other types of data in the more qualitative areas. Communicate your thoughts well. Make sure you use clear and easily understandable language. Avoid too much jargon. Avoid putting too much information. Start with a basic idea of what you are trying to convey and work around it. Organize your manuscript clearly. Then the final slide on how to avoid rejection. Avoid excessive self-citation. So you should not always refer to yourself. Excessive self-citation comes across as unprofessional. Self-citation is unavoidable, especially if you work in a niche subject area and have published a significant amount of work in this area. However, you should self-cite only if it is absolutely essential. And in this context, I also have to say, be careful. What's the journal policy? How to self-cite yourself? In most cases, you're not allowed to write your own name, but you have to write, for example, authors 2015 or something like that in order to kind of cover basically your name. Proofread your manuscript well. Ensure that you proofread your manuscript before submission. Always keep your manuscript away for a few days and look at it with a fresh mind to identify things that you may overlook due to repeatedly looking at it. And proofread also means send it to an English language proofread if this is not your first language. I think that's it's a very important point actually. Sorry, I kind of skipped some slides now. And then get a pre-submission peer review if possible. So that means some colleagues actually looking at it and give you some first suggestions. But I think this also depends on the stage of the researcher. This is especially important for early career researchers. More advanced researchers are sometimes also not so happy about it because in the end of the day, your colleague might also have quite different ideas than what the reviewer is doing, but still your colleague might show you some areas which are not written in that clear way, and in that case, it's still important. So let's think about how to actually overcome journal rejection. As I previously mentioned, it's actually the normal case that you get rejected, unfortunately, since most journals have an acceptance rate of 10% or less, and as a result, that's unfortunately the norm. So what can you do actually if you get finally rejected? The most important thing is, and the most common thing I would say is, don't get frustrated, most importantly, because you have to remember that's unfortunately the norm, and acceptance is unusual. It's 90% gets rejected actually, or more in some journals. So don't take it personal. Don't get too emotional. I know especially early career researchers get very emotional about it, but get used to it and just continue working hard, and finally it will get accepted somewhere. So your next step after getting rejection is, in most cases, submit it to a new journal. But don't just submit it in the same way. Basically incorporate some of the suggestions from the reviewer comments in order to improve the manuscript. So that's the case if you received a hard rejection from a journal, just submit it somewhere else, but first revise it basically. The other option is resubmit it to the same journal. That's only possible if you got a so-called soft rejection. That means they gave you the chance. This is written then in the letter of the editor to you, that they're basically telling you, you have the chance to resubmit it as a new article again, but you have to do all these kind of changes. So in that sense, it's actually very similar to a revision. You will answer to all these reviewer comments and revise your whole paper and submit it as a new article. And I think that's actually a good thing, since this kind of soft rejections are increasing nowadays, also in order to basically increase the rejection rate, which looks good for many journals, and that's why they're increasingly doing this also nowadays. So don't get disappointed if you get a soft rejection. Really take this opportunity. Don't go to another journal, but try it in this journal again. And the last theoretical option is appeal against the rejection. Honestly speaking, I think in most cases this is not successful, and I would not do it because you might only anger the editor, and you might want to submit to this journal in some years again. So I would only really appeal to the rejection if you really think that the reviews were highly flawed and that there were issues and problems with the reviews, but then you clearly have to outline this to the editor. And in very exceptional cases, maybe the editor he or she might give you a chance actually really, but as I said, that's actually very rarely successful. So again, as I said previously, rejection is not the end. Rejection is very, very common, unfortunately. And so you just have to basically continue, work hard as possible, and improve your work based on the reviews you have actually received, and try to improve your work. And you can see in these two examples here, also the examples are from the STEM discipline, but nevertheless they show actually that even Nobel laureates have faced rejections by journals for groundbreaking research, um, but in the end they were finally accepted somewhere else, and this research became very famous. So again, rejection doesn't necessarily mean that your work is bad. It very often only depends on two reviewers, and honestly, if one reviewer only does not like it, it might be enough to get rejected. And so just go to the next journal, improve your work first, go to the next journal. And as you see, when these famous scholars could overcome it, you can also overcome it. And I think everybody can overcome journal rejections, and just work hard, um, persevere, and try again. And in the end, this will lead in most cases to a positive outcome. I would also like to um, refer you to a course which is available with Enago Academy. The URL is shared in your chat box, so just check the URL in case you're interested in this course in publishing in the humanities. And I would also like to refer you to Enago Learn, is an exclusive training platform covering all aspects of academic publishing. So just look there. There's a lot of valuable information which you can definitely use to improve your research and to improve your writing the paper, and also to basically overcome rejections, for example. Okay, thank you very much for listening to this webinar.